Doherty and Associates is a supporter of this breakfast series. And I'll just say a couple things about Jeff. Jeff is Vice President and Portfolio Manager at Doherty. But prior to joining Doherty in 2015, Jeff spent over a decade working exclusively with and in multi-generational family enterprises, family office, sorry. So Jeff, I'll turn it over to you to say a few words, and then we'll get on with the presentation.
Thanks, James. So thanks for the brief intro. We're really proud to partner with Telfer on this series of talks. I personally met Peter a few years ago and immediately drawn to the work that he's doing. It's great to have him here in Ottawa, first of all, but I think he's doing it on an international basis. Having worked with families my entire career, his work is really relevant and it struck a chord. As far as today's topic goes, we all know that families and business have their own unique ways of dealing with conflict. In many ways, it's better than a traditional business, but it also has the potential to be a lot more damaging in the family context. It's an area that's fraught with landmines, and therefore a very important topic to study, discuss, and understand. So we look forward to hearing a bit of Peter's insights today, and we thank Peter and the Telfer School for giving Doherty and Associates the opportunity to be part of it. So thanks.
Great. Thank you very much, Jeff. I'm actually very proud now to introduce Peter Jaskiewicz. Peter is a leader within the Telfer School of Management. He's a full professor and university research chair in enduring entrepreneurship. But as Jeff said, Peter is recognized as one of the top researchers and scholars in the world in family enterprise and business families. And he has been diligently leading the Telfer School's efforts as we look to establish one of the leading centers in the world for research, education, and policy and practice development in family enterprise, with a unique focus on the next generation of family business leaders and owners. Peter, I'll turn it over to you, and certainly looking forward to this presentation.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Jeff. Welcome, everyone. Good morning for those who are closer to me and not in Europe or Asia. Before I get started, I would like to draw attention to two things. We are trying to build here one of the leading teams in the world in family business, and I've just displayed here some of my colleagues, Sabine Rao, Jim Coombs, who are visiting professors, and Evelyn Misselotta, who is a recent addition. Moreover, if you have any questions and don't feel comfortable at the end asking your questions because it's a personal question, do not hesitate to reach out to me. My travel plans are very light this season, and I'm always available and happy to listen. Last but not least, I would like to say that every good research starts with a good idea. And in this case, it was actually a PhD student of the Telfer School of Management, Hong Kyu, who's also, I think, present today, who had the idea to study conflicts, and she has an interest in conflicts in the government sector, and she had to take an additional course, and we decided to take an intensive course with me to review all studies in the world that have been done where people have studied conflicts, in particular families. And she has reviewed over 6 months with me and a colleague more than 70 studies on the topic, complementing what we might know or what we have known, and definitely adding considerable detail. And I would also like to say thank you, Hong, has written based on that a review of the research, which has been published in the top journal this year, very recently, after several years, and competing with more than 40 other papers on various topics. Congratulations, Hong, to that, and definitely that work with Hong has also inspired some of the presentation here. With that being said, conflict management and Q&A is the agenda for today. And let me just briefly say it is more of an amuse-gueule or appetizer what you will be getting, because one could talk about the topic for a longer time, but let us get right into it. So the important thing is, first of all, everybody thinks about conflict and believes they know what they are talking about, but there's different types of conflicts. We distinguish task conflicts. What should we be doing? We are disagreeing on what we should be doing. Process conflicts about how we should be doing things, and relationship conflicts with whom we should be doing the things. So relationship conflicts are very much, we question whether we should be doing it with a particular person. Now the point is, when you ask people what they believe about conflict, they tell you conflicts are bad. But is it really the case if you think about what to do, how to do it, and with whom to do it? The reality is that a lot of studies have analyzed it and found interesting results. I'll show you. And what they basically found is that some task conflict is actually good. If I have to sit down with James, for example, and discuss what we should do as a school, who should, what type of task we should be doing, what type of projects, it's actually good, because yes, we might disagree on some things, but eventually maybe we'll find we come up with better ideas. If we talk about how to do it, it's the same thing. It is very important to get the feedback of other people incorporated, and some tension in that context is positive. So a number of studies have shown actually that some task conflict and some process conflict, they say moderate levels, are actually beneficial to find better outcomes, better tasks, and better processes. However, this is not the case for relationship conflicts. In case of relationship conflicts, the more of them you have it, the more you are basically questioning the other person and expressing that you don't want to work with the other person, that you have a problem with the other person in him or herself, the worse the outcomes. And it is very unfortunate, but relationship conflicts are related to very strong emotions. And obviously, relationship conflicts are most common in families, but they are also common in any type of business and very common in family business. So the first takeaway, some task and process conflict is good, but please keep relationship conflicts at bay. This is a particular example of a conflict I wanted to highlight, because now we are moving very slowly from the types of conflicts already towards conflict management. It is a heated exchange at the United Nations meeting in 1960, where a representative from the Philippines talked about the Soviet Union and what was happening in the Eastern Bloc. And Nikita Khrushchev, the first secretary of the Communist Party, got up, went to the front, and started engaging in a very heated and personal attack, shouting, "You jerk, stooge, lackey," and so on, and toady of American imperialism. And then the whole UN assembly became very unruly. The main thing that then happened is that while people are shouting and getting an exchange, Nikita Khrushchev got his shoe off and slammed it on the podium several times. This is, by the way, a fake picture, because back then there was no videos being made of what was happening, and there was also no photographers capturing that moment, so it was made, but it is considered the best that we have. And he shocked the entire world. This is one particular way to deal with a conflict. In this case, maybe insulting other people and coming to extreme points. And it highlights already one way how you can approach a conflict with somebody else, and a conflict being at the end of the day a disagreement. And now we're already coming to the conflict management mode. So it's very much deal with how one tries to satisfy one's own concerns, and to what extent one tries to satisfy the other person's concerns. In this case, the other person's concerns would be the representative from the Philippines making a point. And in this case, Nikita Khrushchev making his point that he very strongly disagrees with these comments. And you can see that, for example, I'll reveal it here. If I am uncooperative with the other person's demands, which is on the bottom of the cooperativeness scale, and I'm very assertive about my own points, I engage in so-called competition. And the Nikita Khrushchev example is a very strong point of it. And I'm, if you want, very aggressive. I'm not giving in, and I'm very strong in my claims. And that's what happened here. The whole world paid notice, and the reality is that back then in 1960s, they got very scared of what Nikita Khrushchev was doing. And today, historians consider Nikita Khrushchev's behavior as a bigger ploy to change negotiations about nuclear arms. And as far as what I've read about the topic is, they give in to many demands of the Soviet bloc back then, because they thought that the Soviet bloc is run by a barbarian. And they got a bit scared of him, because they said, if this person takes out a shoe in the middle of an assembly and slams it on the table in front of the whole world, then he might also very quickly push the red button that might be next to his bed at night. So that is an example of competition. But there's also other examples. If I am other examples of conflict management modes, if I am very cooperative, and at the same, if I try to be cooperative with the other person, at the same time, I'm pretty assertive about my own goals, I might engage in collaboration. If I'm uncooperative with the other person, but I'm also unassertive, maybe I don't really care about it, I might avoid the situation. If I'm very cooperative and I don't care about my own goals, I might accommodate. And obviously in the middle, there's compromise. And applied to the family business world, I have here 4 more examples where you can try to match the examples. I already gave you the Nikita Khrushchev example, an example of competition. You have a second example, you have children moving far away from home, so they don't have to work in the family business. And you can maybe try to think whether that's collaboration, compromise, avoiding, or accommodation. You have another example of the successor giving in to a father who tells her that he'll retire much later, and so she maybe won't become a CEO. That's another example of an approach, and she gives into that and doesn't say much. And another example would be a father who decides to join the daughter and asks her to join her, and she agrees. Then they set up maybe an online flower shop instead of having a brick and mortar flower shop. And the last example might be parents and next generation members negotiating the succession timeline and sitting down together to discuss how to best transition a business to the next generation. So I give you a few more seconds before I reveal what these examples indicate. So here you see it. So for example, children moving away far away from the family and the business, so they don't have to work in the family business, an example of avoiding. And negotiating with the parents, a succession timeline, and the steps that have to be taken would be an example of compromise, and so on. What is important here is to realize that we constantly engage in a way in which we are maybe defending more or less our own goals and trying to be more or less cooperative with other people. And every family has particular conflict management modes. They do not have to be worse or better. Sometimes they can be all good. We know that in the long term, the avoiding conflict management mode is not helping, because usually it just piles up issues that are hidden. And we know that the competition one can be very damaging, as can very much divide families. The important thing for everyone to remember is, when we look at the literature, is that families that are often stuck in conflict, and maybe these conflicts are getting worse, it's important to try to use another conflict management mode. Maybe if we have always been accommodating somebody else in the family and we get more and more frustrated, maybe we have to become a bit more assertive and try to compromise. Maybe if we have senior family members who are always very strong, have very strong family values, and try to impose them on the next generation, maybe we have to find ways so they would be less, in this case, maybe competing and maybe trying to compromise more. And one of the main insights is that we cannot avoid conflicts, but we can try to manage them better. And one important part is to think about the predominant conflict management mode that you have, or that your family has, maybe the family you're from or the family you're working with, and trying to approach it in a different way, because doing the same thing all over and hoping for another result is really what Einstein says, the definition of, actually he said crazy, because you're doing the same thing all over and it won't usually get better. Moving on. So these were the approaches where we try to consider what the other person does, we automatically in our conflict management approach, and what we do. But there is a major problem with these approaches, is that they are just about us, and to some extent it's very difficult, for example, to do to fix a marriage when you are one of the people in the marriage, because you're inside the system. So the conflict management literature, a lot of studies have realized that there's there's a very limited amount of possibilities if you're part of a conflict to actually end it, because you're within the system and you might be perceived biased. You might actually not have all the knowledge, and obviously you might already be emotional about what's happening. And they realize that in the dual approaches, like the ones that I've just shown you, where you're more or less cooperative with the other person, that there's actually better approaches out there. We're not trying to fix one-on-one relationship, but you're trying to make the whole system better, and they're called the more than approaches. And they usually mean involving another person, a third party. Somebody who is able to mediate, to show a different approach, maybe a third path, or who is able to fix an underlying issue, because you're fighting symptoms, but you're not aware of the underlying cause. A classical example for mediation would be 2 kids fighting over an orange, and the reality mediator would realize that one of them wants to make orange juice and the other one wants to have parts of the skin to bake a cake. That's a classical example where the kids are unable to reason or to see the deeper meaning of their fight or conflict, but the mediator is able, in discussions with them, to realize that they are actually having very complementary ideas, and it's able to fix the situation. Another point that has become very clear is it's very important to use in the family business or family office context governance tools, especially to manage the family's connection with both either wealth and or business, so with the family office or the family business. Because there's ways basically to stop conflicts from escalating if they're getting worse and worse, and there's possibilities to introduce rules of engagement to avoid unnecessary or escalating relationship conflicts, and also because there's ways in which we can implement processes to deal with conflict. So we cannot stop all conflicts, but we can manage them in a way so they don't become ballistic and terrible. And very importantly here is, it is not so much about the governance tool in itself. If we create a forum for family members to communicate with each other, it might actually make many families fight more with each other, because before that they've been avoiding these things. And now we force them together, and a lot of things might bubble up. What is more important to engage what we call a fair process, to let people speak up about their concerns, make them feel comfortable and know that they're being listened to, and look for a way forward rather than looking backwards and referring to all the bad things that happened before. What is important here, that the process of engaging them and finding out where they are and how they're able, or whether they're actually able to move forward, is actually more valuable than the actual family governance that is being introduced, because it gives them a possibility to see to what extent they might be able to overcome the issues they're having and move together forward. And if they're able to move forward, it's then very good to set up clear rules. It is also very important to realize in the more than approaches versus dual approaches and the modes that I've shown before, that very often people think about to what extent can I actually manage my goals or manage to succeed at something or a particular process task. What they very often do not realize, that in the long term, it's not just one interaction, but it's a series of 20, 50, 500 interactions. And with every step you're taking, you are already changing how the next 400, 500, 320 interactions will end up. So it's very important to be more proactive and think about your next engagement with a particular person or group or branch will actually not only determine one particular outcome, but will actually determine what will happen over the next 10, 15, 20 years. And it's very important in this context to give maybe some direct advice, what is very obvious from both the literature as well as the what we see in practices, that if families get stuck, it's very important to talk about how, when you engage somebody who has an issue in the family, to talk about how you feel about things, to talk about I feel this way about things, I see this kind of problem, I wonder, instead of engaging the other person as you. Whenever we speak about what other people did or what they might have felt or thought, we are actually in danger of starting a relationship conflict, because we might be misinterpreting that person. As long as we speak about ourselves, how we perceive that person to have acted, how we perceive a decision to have been made, we speak about how we see it, and we reduce the dangers of engaging in very bad relationship conflicts. So one point here is, be aware that there's long-term consequences of every interaction you engage in, and try to speak about your own feelings, your own perceptions, rather than saying that this is what really happened, because the other person might have actually done it slightly differently, or you might have lacked some information, or you might be misinterpreting a situation. Finally, what is really important for more than approaches, there is also the possibility to learn and to grow. And in many cases, it is such that we see in non-family firms where people are hired and are basically not bringing, if you want, the family dynamics into the business or into the family office. They're willing to engage, let's say, in executive education, or they're willing to enjoy seminars on how to become better leaders, or get feedback from third parties, or work with a coach. In families, we see it less frequently. Why? Because people are very afraid, for good reason, to share very personal anecdotes or problems. But as a result of that, there's less learning happening. And in family context, there should actually be more learning, because it's more complicated to juggle the family and the business. And it's actually very important to learn about how to better communicate, to learn how to engage in better processes, and also to learn about maybe your own personality types, and maybe personality types in your family who might be easier or more difficult to deal with. And we see that people who engage in a path of learning can, over the midterm, doesn't happen overnight, much better deal with emerging conflicts, recognize that there's danger of conflicts, and manage conflicts. So we're already close to the end. I was fast, and I hope I haven't lost you. What are the main takeaways from this appetizer? Prevent relationship conflicts, if possible. Conflicts that deal with the other person being the problem. It's okay to have some process and task conflicts, and recognizing early on that there might be relationship conflicts is critical to stop it, because once they escalate, and they can get very quickly out of hand, and people might engage actually in behaviors that make everyone worse off. Conflict management is more important than conflicts. Very often we say businesses or families are plagued by conflicts. That happens to every family and every business. What we see is it's not the conflicts that are out there that matter, but how you deal with them. You will not be able to avoid all conflicts, and some conflicts, as we said, are good. It's just important to be aware of that and to be able to manage them in an appropriate way. One way to manage them appropriately are the different ways to talk about compromising, collaborating, accommodating. Importantly, if one way doesn't work, try another way. And when we go to the more than approaches, focus on good communication, how to make communication better. Try to engage in good processes, as it's not so much the outcome of the process as a fair process in itself that will already take away a lot of the problems. Good governance in the family and the business and or the family office is critical. And do not dismiss outsiders' help. It's very important to have independent help who can help you overcome maybe particular bias and who might actually gain the trust and respect of all the parties involved. And as a final point, there is in families something that doesn't exist in non-families so much. I call it the nuclear option. There's in every family things that happened and that were not pleasant, and everyone is aware of them. In many cases, they have been buried and are gone. But family members, very often when they get to a point where they feel under pressure, a bit like maybe a herd animal in a corner, they can bury them out and they can make any family burst. They can make any situation terrible. And it's very important to not push family members, because once they pull what I call this nuclear option, buried conflicts, old scars are torn open, and very often it is impossible to get the genie again inside the box or inside the bottle in this case. So it's very important to avoid that, and every family member will know things from the past that can make that can undermine the very actually option for collaboration or for conflict management in a family. And it's important to be clear that once that option is pulled, things might get very challenging. With that said, thank you for your attention, and I think we have a few more minutes for your questions. And if you don't have enough time or still want to reflect on what we've talked about, don't hesitate to email me or contact me directly.